When thousands were in danger, this canine police dog's final act left the city in shock. Labeled unfit for service, K9 Bolt was on the verge of being discarded until Detective Zoe Callahan fought for one last chance. A deadly bomb threat at a packed stadium throws them into a race against time. But when the first device is revealed as a decoy, the true danger remains hidden. With seconds left and no safe way to disarm it, Zoe places the fate of thousands in the paws of the dog no one believed in. What happens next will leave the entire city breathless. Detective Zoe Callahan stood in the training yard, her boots sinking slightly into the damp dirt. A German shepherd paced a few feet away, his dark eyes fixed on her, but not with trust, more like defiance. Bolt, the dog that should have been retired weeks ago. The department had given up on him, but Zoe refused to. She pulled a training sleeve over her arm and held out a firm hand. Bolt, heel. The dog didn't move. The officers watching from behind the fence whispered among themselves. Everyone knew Bolt's story, once a top-tier canine, now labeled unfit for service. His last handler had been killed in action, and ever since, Bolt refused to obey commands, as if waiting for someone who would never return. Again, Zoe said, her voice steady. Bolt let out a low sound, a mix of frustration and warning. He wasn't just disobedient, he was dangerous. Captain Eric Mathis stepped forward, arms crossed. "We don't have time for this, Callahan." She didn't look away from Bolt. "Just one more chance." Mathis sighed, checking his watch. "Fine. But if he fails again, he's out." Zoe tightened her grip on the leash. "Bolt, heel." The dog hesitated, just for a second, but then lunged. Not at her, but at the training dummy behind her, tearing into it with uncontrolled aggression. Officers shouted. Zoe dropped the leash and stepped back. Failure. Mathis didn't wait. "He's done. That's it." Bolt released the dummy and turned to face her, breathing heavily. Zoe knelt in front of him. "I know what you're afraid of," she said quietly. "But you don't get to stop trying." The dog didn't respond. He just stared. Before she could say another word, an officer sprinted from the building, his face tense. "We've got a situation." Intelligence intercepted an encrypted message. "There's a threat on the city." Zoe stood. "Where?" "They don't know. No location, no details, just that it's big." Mathis nodded. "All right, people, we're on high alert." Zoe looked down at Bolt, then back at her captain. "If we're short on K9 units, let me take him into the field." Mathis shook his head. "Not happening." Then, the radio crackled. "Emergency alert. Bomb threat at Westgate Stadium. Repeat, possible explosive device at the stadium. We need all available units now." Mathis swore under his breath. "How many inside?" "Over 50,000. Zoe took a step forward. "Then we don't have a choice." Mathis hesitated. The department was running low on bomb-sniffing dogs. Bolt wasn't reliable, but they needed every possible resource. "Fine," he said. "But if he messes this up, Callahan, it's on you." The police vehicles pulled up outside Westgate Stadium. The sirens had been silenced to avoid panic, but the tension was thick. Officers moved quickly, checking exits, scanning faces. Zoe grabbed Bolt's leash, her fingers tightening around it. "Bolt, we need this," she whispered. "Find the scent." The dog's ears flicked forward. He lowered his head, sniffing the air. And then, movement. He pulled hard, leading Zoe through the security gates. Officers rushed aside as she followed. "He's got something," she called over her shoulder. Mathis and the bomb squad trailed behind. Bolt's nose stayed low as he wove between rows of empty seats, his focus locked onto something unseen. Then, he stopped. Right beside a backpack left under a bench. Zoe's chest tightened. Everyone clear the area. The bomb squad moved in, scanning the bag. A technician checked the device. His voice came through the radio. "It's a decoy." Zoe's stomach dropped. A distraction. She grabbed her radio. "We've been misled. The real bomb is somewhere else." A sudden buzz filled her earpiece. A voice crackled through, a distorted transmission. "Too late." Zoe's head snapped up. Across the stadium, a red light blinked. Someone was watching them. In a hidden surveillance room beneath the stadium, Nolan Sykes leaned back in his chair, watching the live feed of Zoe and Bolt on his monitors. A smirk tugged at his lips. Phase 1, complete. The fake bomb had done its job, sending the police into a controlled evacuation. Officers moved quickly, guiding thousands toward the exits. Over the radio, Captain Mathis gave steady orders, ensuring that panic didn't spread. The crowd remained unaware that the real danger was still inside. Zoe stood at the edge of the field, gripping Bolt's leash. The dog was tense, ears up, eyes sharp. Something was wrong. "This isn't over," she muttered, scanning the stadium. Bolt pulled. Hard. His nails scraped the pavement as he dragged Zoe toward an open walkway leading to the maintenance corridors beneath the stands. "Callahan!" Mathis's voice cut through the radio. "Where are you going?" She didn't answer. A figure moved in the distance, just past the entrance to the control room. A man in a security jacket, shifting his weight, watching. The moment he saw her looking, he turned and ran. Zoe didn't hesitate. "Bolt, go!" The dog bolted forward, tearing across the empty hall. Zoe sprinted after him, pushing past fleeing staff. The man shoved open a door, heading down a service hallway. Bolt was closing the gap fast. The chase tore through the underground corridors, past storage rooms and electrical panels. The suspect was fast, ducking through side doors, knocking over crates and tool carts to slow them down. Bolt leaped over every obstacle, relentless in his pursuit. Then, the man made a mistake. He ran into a dead end. Zoe reached for her radio. "Cornered him. Sending location now." Before she could give another command, Bolt lunged. Not at the man she had been chasing, but at a stadium technician standing nearby. "Whoa!" Zoe called out, ready to call him off. But then she saw a small device strapped to the man's wrist. Her breath hitched. Detonator. Bolt growled, teeth bared, his front paws digging into the technician's chest. The man didn't even struggle, he just grinned. "You found me," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "But you're too late. The real bomb is still ticking." Zoe's radio buzzed. "Suspect in custody," an officer reported. Mathis responded, "Good work. Get him to interrogation." Zoe shook her head. "It's not over," she said into the radio. "There's another bomb, and it's still here." The moment the words left her mouth, she heard the click. An explosion rocked the far side of the stadium. The force knocked Zoe off her feet. Dust and concrete filled the air. The sound of shattering glass and collapsing steel rang through the halls. She coughed, waving away the dust, her ears ringing. Her radio was filled with chaos, shouting, broken transmissions, the sound of sirens. "Bolt?" she called, her voice hoarse. A rustling sound came from nearby. The dog was already moving, already sniffing. He ignored the debris, the cuts on his fur, the blood on his paws. He was focused. "That's right," Zoe whispered, pushing herself up. "Find it." Mathis's voice came through the static. "Callahan, report. Explosion in the lower levels. We're trapped, but Bolt's got something." She followed the dog as he led her deeper into the tunnels. Pipes dripped from overhead. The concrete walls were lined with old lockers and rusted equipment. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Bolt stopped, his body stiffened, nose inches from a maintenance panel. Zoe swallowed hard and stepped forward. She pried open the door, wires. This was it. The bomb. A mess of circuits, a timer counting down. Less than 5 minutes. She pressed her radio. "Bomb squad, I've got eyes on the device." "Can you defuse it?" Mathis asked. She stared at the mess of wires. This wasn't her expertise. Not without setting it off. Silence. Then, Mathis spoke again. "Stand by." Bolt wasn't standing by. The dog was still moving, pushing through the rubble, sniffing the edges of the panel. Zoe watched as he stopped at a loose floor tile, his nose pressing against a barely visible gap. "What is it?" she asked. Bolt's ears flattened. He barked, a sharp, urgent sound. And then, he started digging. Zoe knelt beside him and pulled at the tile. It lifted, revealing another device. The failsafe. If the first bomb was disarmed, this one would trigger automatically. Mathis's voice crackled through again. "We need options." Zoe's mind raced. And then it hit her. "Bolt," she whispered. "We're doing this your way." She pulled out her knife and cut the leash. The dog looked at her. No hesitation. No fear. "Go," she said, and Bolt did. He pushed his body through the rubble, forcing his way deeper into the tunnel. His nose led him forward. He didn't stop, didn't slow down. His paws digging through loose dirt and debris. His nose twitched as he sniffed the path ahead, each step bringing them closer to something hidden beneath the field. Zoe followed, her flashlight cutting through the dust-filled air. The tunnel narrowed, forcing her to crouch as she moved. A series of old maintenance panels lined the walls, wires hanging loosely from some of them. Bolt sniffed the ground, his body tense. Then, he stopped. His front paw scratched at a section of the floor. Zoe grabbed her radio. "I think we've got it." Static filled her earpiece before Captain Mathis's voice came through. "Sending the squad to your location. Stay put." She pulled a crowbar from her belt and jammed it under the floor panel. It groaned as she lifted it, revealing a massive explosive device. The bomb wasn't like the decoy from earlier, this one was complex. Rows of circuits lined the edges, and the central module displayed a countdown. 2:47 Mathis's voice returned. "Bomb squads en route. Do not touch anything." "Understood," Zoe said, but she could already see the problem. The squad wouldn't make it in time. Bolt lowered his head, sniffing near the device. Zoe grabbed his harness and pulled him back. "Not yet, buddy." She turned as two bomb technicians slid into the tunnel. One of them, a sharp-faced woman named Vargas, examined the setup and immediately stepped away. "We have a problem," she muttered into her radio. "Motion sensors." Zoe's stomach clenched. Mathis's voice crackled in. "Explain." "If we touch the device, or even breathe wrong, it'll detonate immediately." Silence. Then, Mathis spoke again. "Options?" "None," Vargas said. "It's built to be tamper-proof. The only way to stop it is to disable the sensors before cutting the main circuit." Zoe inhaled sharply. There was one way. Her hand tightened around Bolt's harness. "He can do it." Mathis responded instantly. "No, we're not gambling this on a dog that's never passed training." Zoe turned toward the radio, voice steady. "Bolt can handle this." Mathis didn't respond. Vargas shook her head. "That dog's never even finished the full disarmament drill." "Because we never gave him a real reason to," Zoe said. The countdown flashed. 2 o'clock. "Mathis, if we don't try this, thousands will die." Silence. "Then, do it." Zoe crouched beside Bolt, pressing her forehead lightly to his. "This is it, boy. You know this. You know this." Bolt's ears flicked forward. He looked at the bomb, then back at her. She pointed at the sensor trigger. "Disable it." Bolt took a slow step forward. Every person in the tunnel froze. The German shepherd lowered his head, sniffing carefully. His breath was steady. He raised a paw, then stopped. Zoe's fingers curled into her palm. "You can do this." Bolt's eyes met hers for a fraction of a second. Then, he moved. His paw hovered over the sensor, barely touching it. The seconds on the bomb ticked down. 120 Bolt adjusted his angle, lowering his snout. He pressed his nose against a small switch at the base of the sensor, a nearly invisible reset button. A faint click sounded. The red light on the sensor turned green. Zoe's breath caught. "Yes." Vargas scrambled forward, taking over. "Sensor disabled. We're cutting the circuit now." 045 Bolt backed away as the bomb squad worked. Wires were clipped. Modules were disconnected. The countdown froze at 009. Vargas exhaled. "It's dead." Zoe dropped to her knees, running a hand through Bolt's fur. "Good boy," she whispered. For the first time, the German Shepherd didn't look away. He had done what no one believed he could. He had saved everyone. Zoe collapsed beside Bolt, pulling him close, the weight of everything crashing down at once. "I always knew you had it in you," she whispered. The German Shepherd leaned into her touch, his breath steady despite the exhaustion in his body. Around them, officers secured the bomb site, the tension in the air finally lifting. Captain Mathis stepped forward, his usual hardened expression softer than usual. "You two just saved this city." His voice carried across the room, drawing the attention of every officer present. "And I don't say this often, Callahan, but I was wrong." A few officers clapped. Some even cheered. Zoe scratched behind Bolt's ear, letting the moment settle. "You weren't wrong," she said, looking up at Mathis. "You just didn't see what I saw." Outside the stadium, the night sky stretched over the flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers and emergency vehicles. Reporters had already gathered at the barricades, cameras rolling as the crowd of evacuees murmured in confusion. News would spread fast. A failed bombing, a police K9 turned hero. Bolt walked beside Zoe, his head held higher than before. Somewhere within the dispersing crowd, a figure lingered. Tobias came. Hands in his pockets, he watched Zoe and Bolt emerge from the stadium. The corners of his mouth curled slightly as he pulled out a phone. The call connected immediately. "Failed?" The voice on the other end asked. Kane's smile didn't falter. "Not at all," he said, turning away. "We move to phase 2.